The cold January air cut through Marcus Reed's coat as he shoveled the last stretch of his driveway, his breath forming small clouds in the twilight. The snow had come down hard last night, blanketing the quiet suburban neighborhood in thick white layers. Most of the houses were still dark, their owners tucked away in the warmth of their homes. But Marcus had never been one to sit back and let the world pile up around him, whether it was snow, obstacles, or prejudice. At 38, he had built everything from the ground up. A successful architect, he had worked tirelessly to earn the life he now lived. A spacious home in an affluent neighborhood, a thriving firm that bore his name, and a reputation that commanded respect. Yet, no matter how many awards hung on his walls or how many zeros decorated his bank account, there were always people like her. People who saw his skin before they saw his achievements. Karen Whitmore had lived 3 houses down for the last 5 years. A middle-aged divorcee with a sharp tongue and sharper opinions. She had a particular interest in keeping the neighborhood pristine. She volunteered for the HOA, policed every lawn, and eyed Marcus's presence in their community like an intruder sneaking through a window. Their encounters had always been laced with passive aggression. Her snide remarks about how lucky he must be, the way she once asked if he really owned the house, or the time she called security when he hosted a 4th of July barbecue that she deemed too loud. But tonight, she took it a step further. Marcus had just leaned his shovel against the garage when he heard it, the unmistakable, clipped voice of Karen talking into her phone. "Yes, I'm on Elmwood Drive. There's a suspicious man outside, possibly trespassing. He's acting aggressively. Yes, send someone quickly." His stomach clenched as he turned. Locking eyes with her standing on her porch, phone pressed to her ear. She had done it. She had called the police. On him, for shoveling his own driveway. But Karen had no idea. She had no idea that Marcus had stumbled upon something that would shatter her perfect little world. And this time, he was the one holding all the power. Marcus clenched his jaw as he watched Karen pace her porch, her eyes flicking toward him with a self-satisfied smirk. He knew how this would go. The police would arrive, see a black man standing outside a beautiful house, and suddenly, his presence would need to be justified. He had been here before. Years of success didn't make him immune to the weight of suspicion. But this time was different. This time, he had something Karen didn't know about, something he hadn't even processed yet. The events of the next half hour played out like a predictable script. A squad car rolled up, red and blue lights flashing against the snow. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters, scanning the scene with wary eyes. "Sir, we got a call about a suspicious individual," one of them said, voice flat. Marcus exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. "Yeah, I imagine you did. I live here." He gestured toward his house. "I was shoveling my driveway." The officers exchanged glances before one turned toward Karen, who had already put on her best concerned citizen act. "I was just looking out for the neighborhood," she said innocently. "I didn't recognize him at first, and he seemed agitated. I was only trying to be cautious." Marcus had heard the script before, too. She was backpedaling now, shifting the narrative just enough to avoid consequences. The officers asked him for ID, which he handed over without argument. One of them took a glance, nodded stiffly, and muttered, "Sorry for the inconvenience, sir." But Karen wasn't done. Over the next few days, she escalated. Small things at first. A neighbor suddenly stopping to ask if Marcus was really the homeowner. An HOA email about unauthorized individuals in the community. A few side eyes from people he had once shared friendly nods with. Then came the bigger move. Marcus received a notice in his mailbox, an official complaint filed with the HOA, citing him for violating neighborhood policies. Apparently, someone had accused him of running an unlicensed business from his home. The accusation was absurd. He worked out of an office downtown, and his home had nothing more than a study and a laptop. But he knew exactly who was behind it. Karen had been spreading rumors, whispering to the right people, making sure certain names heard about the shady business being run out of the Reed household. Marcus confronted her on the sidewalk one evening, his patience wearing thin. "Cut the act, Karen," he said, arms crossed. "I know what you're doing." She gave him that same sickeningly sweet smile. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Marcus. I'm just concerned about keeping our neighborhood safe and respectable." There it was. That word. Respectable. Karen was turning the community against him, weaving a web of doubt that could have real consequences. His business relied on reputation. If these rumors bled outside the neighborhood, if clients started questioning his legitimacy, it could cost him work. And Karen knew that. That's why she wasn't stopping. But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have anticipated, was that Marcus had already found something that could destroy her. And soon, everyone would know the truth. The storm Karen had started showed no signs of settling. Within a week, Marcus felt the full weight of her manipulations pressing down on him like a tightening noose. The whispers in the neighborhood grew louder, suspicion thick in the air. People who once waved at him now hesitated, their smiles forced and distant. It wasn't just an occasional cold shoulder. It was deliberate. And then the real blow landed. Marcus arrived at work one morning to find his assistant, Janelle, looking at him with wide eyes, her phone gripped in her hands. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a neighborhood forum post. Karen had taken her campaign digital. The post was carefully worded, dripping with veiled accusations. She never mentioned Marcus by name, but she didn't have to. Our beautiful neighborhood has always been a safe, family-friendly place, but recently, certain unvetted individuals have been conducting questionable activities out of their homes. I urge our community to remain vigilant. After all, we don't want Elmwood Drive turning into just any neighborhood. Below the post were dozens of comments, most from neighbors who had no idea what was really happening. "I heard something about this. Isn't that house near the corner? People should be required to submit background checks before moving here. Ugh. This is why the HOA needs stricter policies." And then one that made Marcus's blood run cold. "If you see something suspicious, report it. Call the authorities before it's too late." It was a dog whistle. Karen wasn't just poisoning his reputation. She was putting a target on his back. By the time Marcus left work that day, he had 3 emails from clients asking if he could clear something up. The rumors were reaching beyond the neighborhood. 2 days later, a second HOA complaint arrived, this time claiming Marcus was violating noise ordinances, an outright lie. But it didn't matter. A formal review was scheduled, and if they ruled against him, he could be fined or worse, forced to move. The escalation was relentless. And then came the public humiliation. It was Saturday afternoon, and Marcus was pulling into his driveway when he noticed a police car parked out front. A small group of neighbors had gathered on Karen's lawn, murmuring among themselves. The officer approached as Marcus stepped out of his car. "Mr. Reed?" "Yes." "We received another call about unauthorized activities at this address. Would you mind answering a few questions?" Marcus clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. "This is harassment." The officer didn't argue. He simply handed Marcus a card. "We have to follow up on every report. If this continues, we'll have to involve the HOA board formally." Karen was standing on her porch, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. Her expression was unreadable, but Marcus knew what this was. She wanted him to break. She wanted him to lash out, to lose his temper, to give her the final proof she needed that he didn't belong here. That was the moment he decided. He wasn't just going to clear his name. He was going to burn hers to the ground. The breaking point. Marcus went inside and locked the door behind him, his heart pounding. He grabbed his laptop, opened the folder he had nearly forgotten about, and stared at the file that could change everything. The thing he had found 2 weeks ago. The thing Karen had no idea he knew. Late last month, he had received a misdelivered package. It was small, from a law firm, and addressed to Karen Whitmore. He wouldn't have given it a second thought if not for the return label. Foreclosure Services Division. Curious. He had looked up the company. They specialize in asset seizures and legal actions against homeowners in default. A few discreet searches later, he found what Karen had been desperately trying to hide. Her house was in foreclosure. She wasn't the queen of Elmwood Drive. She was clinging to a crumbling throne. And that wasn't all. There were fraud allegations attached to her name. Something about an investment scheme gone wrong, lawsuits from people claiming she had swindled them out of money. Karen was drowning, and she had been trying to take him down with her. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. She had pushed him too far. Now, it was his turn. Marcus stared at the foreclosure documents on his screen, his fingers tapping against the desk in measured rhythm. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was the weapon he needed. Karen had spent weeks trying to paint him as the problem, turning neighbors against him, threatening his career, and calling the police on him just for existing in his own home. But now, he had something she couldn't talk her way out of. He wasn't just going to clear his name. He was going to end her. Step 1. Gathering the pieces. Marcus spent the next few days methodically compiling everything he needed. He wasn't about to make the same mistake Karen had. Striking without proof. If he was going to bring her down, he was going to do it right. First, he hired a private investigator to confirm what he had found. It didn't take long. By Tuesday morning, Marcus had a neatly compiled report detailing Karen's financial ruin. Not only was she behind on her mortgage, but she had lied on her HOA board filings, claiming full ownership of her property when in reality, the bank had already filed for repossession. Then there was a fraud. It turned out Karen had been involved in a shady real estate investment scam a few years back, promising high returns to a handful of investors who never saw a dime. Multiple complaints had been filed, but she had settled with hush money before things escalated to criminal charges. Now, she was drowning in debt, and her house of cards was about to collapse. Marcus smiled as he scanned the documents. Perfect. Step 2. Building an army. Karen had spent years crafting her perfect image. The righteous, upstanding woman of Elmwood Drive. If Marcus wanted to destroy her, he needed to crack that image in front of everyone who believed in her. So, he started making calls. First, he reached out to the HOA board. He requested a meeting, bringing along the documented proof that Karen had lied about her property status on official filings. The board members, particularly the HOA president, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda Tran, listened carefully. "This is serious," Linda said, flipping through the paperwork. "If she misrepresented ownership, that's a violation of our regulations. She's been pushing for tighter restrictions on renters and new homeowners, yet she doesn't even own her property." Marcus nodded. "And there's more." He then presented the police reports. Proof that Karen had made multiple false emergency calls about him. There were at least 3 on record, and Marcus had personally spoken to the responding officers. He also had statements from other neighbors who had been targets of her harassment in the past. Linda's lips thinned. "This is disturbing." "More than that," Marcus said, voice calm but firm. "It's illegal." The board agreed to an emergency session to review the evidence, but Marcus wasn't done. Next, he reached out to his contacts in the local business community. Karen's old investors, the ones she had scammed. Marcus had a few mutual acquaintances, and when he let slip that her name was about to make headlines again, They were more than happy to resurface their old grievances. Then he spoke to a journalist friend at a local news station. An HOA board member caught up in fraud? That's a story, she had said, practically salivating at the scoop. By the end of the week, the trap was set. And Karen, she had no idea. Step 3. The turning point. The night before the HOA meeting, Marcus spotted Karen outside. Her usual smugness plastered across her face as she chatted with a few neighbors. She thought she was winning. She thought she had successfully turned the community against him. She had no clue that by tomorrow night, everything she had built was going to crumble. And the best part, she had done it all to herself. Karen glanced at Marcus, her smirk widening. "I hope you're not getting too comfortable, Marcus," she called out. "It'd be a shame if the HOA had to take further action against your situation." Marcus didn't flinch. He just smiled. "Oh, don't worry, Karen," he said, his voice dripping with quiet confidence. "By this time tomorrow, everything's going to change." Karen frowned slightly, but before she could reply, Marcus turned and walked inside. Tomorrow, the war would end, and she was going to lose. The HOA meeting was packed. Neighbors filled the room, whispering among themselves as they waited. Karen sat near the front, her expression smug, her posture upright like she had already won. She had spent weeks poisoning the well, and she was certain tonight was the night Marcus would finally be cornered. Marcus, however, sat calmly at the opposite end of the room, watching as the board members took their seats. Linda Tran, the HOA president, cleared her throat and began. "We're here to address several concerns regarding community disputes, HOA compliance, and official complaints." She shuffled her papers before glancing up. "Mr. Reed, you requested to speak first." Marcus stood, buttoning his suit jacket, and moved to the front of the room. His voice was calm, measured, his confidence unshaken. "Over the past few weeks, I've been the target of harassment, false accusations, and police calls that wasted taxpayer resources. A smear campaign has been orchestrated against me, threatening my reputation and my home." He turned slightly, his eyes landing on Karen, who tilted her head in faux confusion. Marcus placed a thick folder on the table and slid it toward Linda. "But the real problem isn't me, it's her." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd as Linda opened the folder. Inside were the documents, the foreclosure notice, the fraudulent filings, the police reports. "This is a legal document proving that Karen Whitmore does not own her home," Marcus continued, turning to the crowd. "Yet, she has repeatedly filed complaints against actual homeowners, using her position on the HOA board to manipulate community policies. She's misrepresented her ownership to the board, which is a direct violation of HOA regulations." Karen stiffened, her face flushing. "That's not true," she snapped. "This is ridiculous. My finances are none of your business." Marcus didn't flinch. He simply gestured to Linda, who held up the foreclosure notice for the board to see. "This is official documentation," Linda said, her voice sharp. "Ms. Whitmore, do you deny that your home is in foreclosure?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed. The color drained from her face. That's not relevant," she stammered. "I have a plan in place to fix this." Marcus smiled. "Oh, I'm sure you had a plan," he said smoothly. "Like how you planned to scam people out of their money." Gasps rang out. Karen shot up from her seat. "That's a lie," she shrieked. But Marcus had anticipated this. He pulled out another folder and handed it to Linda. Inside were records of complaints against Karen from her previous investors, people she had scammed in her shady real estate deals. "This is public record," he said. "She's already settled multiple cases outside of court to keep this quiet. But I think everyone deserves to know who's been trying to control this community." Karen's hands trembled. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but she found none. The people she had spent years charming, manipulating, and controlling were finally seeing her for what she was. One neighbor, a woman named Cheryl, folded her arms. "Wait, you've been calling the cops on Marcus while your own house was in foreclosure, and you never told us." Another neighbor, Richard, shook his head. "And you lied on your HOA filings? How were you even allowed to stay on the board?" Karen's mask cracked. "I didn't lie," she hissed. "I own my home." "Well, I will own it once things are settled." Linda sighed, rubbing her temple. "Ms. Whitmore, according to HOA bylaws, all board members must be homeowners in good financial standing. Since you are in active foreclosure, you are ineligible to serve on this board. Effective immediately, you are removed from your position." The room erupted in whispers. Karen stumbled back into her seat, shaking her head. "This isn't fair," she muttered. "This isn't fair." But the damage was done. And Marcus? He had won. Karen's fall from grace was swift and absolute. By the next morning, her name was on every neighborhood forum, but not in the way she was used to. The same people who had once whispered conspiracies about Marcus were now turning on her. I can't believe she was lying this whole time. She tried to ruin Marcus while her own house was being taken away. She doesn't even own her property. She had so much to say about keeping the neighborhood safe. For what? By the end of the week, Karen was gone. The foreclosure process had been inevitable. But now that her deception was exposed, she had no allies left to fight for her. She packed up what little dignity she had and left Elmwood Drive, her once pristine reputation in ruins. The HOA moved quickly to erase her influence. New board elections were held, policies were adjusted, and her previous complaints, including those against Marcus, were officially dismissed. As for Marcus, he had never felt more at home. One evening, as he shoveled his driveway, this time without the fear of sirens in the distance, Linda Tran stopped by. "You did the neighborhood a favor," she said with a small smile. Marcus chuckled. "I didn't do it for them." She nodded, understanding. "Still, I'm glad you stayed." So was he. As Linda walked away, Marcus leaned on his shovel, taking in the crisp winter air. For the first time in weeks, the street was quiet. No prying eyes, no whispers, no Karen. Justice had been served. And peace? Peace had finally come home.